College basketball's best West Coast rivalry delivered again on Tuesday, but the Gaels pulled away, and now we will see if Gonzaga can avoid the dreaded 8-9 seed line on Selection Sunday.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, it was an 0-for-2 day for Gonzaga basketball on Tuesday evening in the WCC Championship games. First, the Lady Zags lost to the Portland Pilots, a team they beat by 50 earlier this season, just a few weeks ago. We're going to talk about that game to close out the show, what it means for Coach Lisa Fortier's team. We're also going to talk about Gonzaga's loss to St. Mary's on Tuesday in the WCC Championship game, what it means for their seeding, what we saw in the game, etc., etc. Tough night, tough day for the Zags in Las Vegas. But ultimately, my main takeaway from this game, we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty, the foul trouble, etc., the things that happened, but this is one of the best rivalries in college basketball, and Tuesday delivered in every single way. Obviously, you want your team to win, and Gonzaga led this game for an incredibly small amount of time. I think it was less than a total minute that they had a lead in this game. They took the lead at around the under 8 in the second half. Anton Watson hit some free throws. Mitchell Saxon got fouled, hit some free throws. That sparked a 7-0 run. St. Mary's never looked back. But it was a very close game. You might think, okay, Gonzaga was down for 39 and a half minutes in this game and lost by 9 ultimately, but it felt like a really close game. It was chippy. It was intense. There was fights, not quite full-on fights, but like kind of fights. There was a lot of emotion and heat in this basketball game, a chess match between two great coaches of making adjustments and figuring out ways to change things. And one of the things that this broadcast highlighted during the game really blew me away. And I think I want to start with that before we get into the actual loss for Gonzaga and a little bit more about what it means to clear any concern for people who maybe haven't been listening to as much of the NCAA tournament conversation. Gonzaga, this loss is not going to push Gonzaga onto the bubble. It's not going to push them anywhere close to being outside the NCAA tournament. In fact, I think they're still going to get a single-digit seed. In fact, I'd be very shocked if they don't still get a single-digit seed in the NCAA tournament. We will get to that, so I don't want there to be any panic that we're about that topic. I would be very, very surprised if they drop really all that far at all after losing to a really, really good team in St. Mary's. But the rivalry aspect was just on full display in this game, and I loved it. I hated that we lost. I hated that Gonzaga lost. You all did too, unless you're a St. Mary's fan who is listening, which is great. Welcome. We got to love that. I think if you're listening to the opposing team's podcast after a game, that proves my point of how great of a rivalry this is, how exciting it is, how intense it is, how angry and anger-inducing it can be. We saw Alex Ducas's comments after the last loss. That man was pissed. And then he went and got himself a technical foul in this game because he was still pissed. He's played more games against Gonzaga than anybody in St. Mary's history. There's a reason he was pissed. Anton Watson, he was pretty mad in this game too. And that fuels that fire, that energy that we saw in this game. Back to the broadcast information that they shared. This is the 14th matchup between Gonzaga and St. Mary's in the WCC's title game. That is the most matchups between two individual teams in a conference title game of all time. It is tied with Duke and North Carolina for the most matchups of all time. So if Duke and UNC end up meeting in the ACC title game this year, which feels pretty likely considering the rest of the ACC outside of Clemson and sort of Virginia just isn't all that good this year. Until then, though, Gonzaga and St. Mary's and Duke and UNC are tied. Gonzaga and St. Mary's first met in the WCC title game in 2004. The first time that Duke and North Carolina met in the ACC title game was 1940. That is how consistent Gonzaga and St. Mary's have been. It also says a little bit about the rest of the WCC, which is fair. That's a fair takeaway to have about that. But these two programs have been head and shoulders ahead of everybody else in the WCC. BYU was in this conference for a decade, and yet St. Mary's and Gonzaga already got to the point where they have the record currently for most matchups between two conference teams in their conference tournament game. That is just incredible. And then, like we said, we saw Anton Watson and Aidan Mahaney chirping at each other just heading into halftime. We saw a Ryan Nembhard and Mason Forbes tie up where neither wanted to get rid of the basketball. Alex Dukas came in, pulled the basketball away, caused a double technical. We saw Anton Watson, and to be clear, this was very, very obviously an accident, but he put boot right to Aidan Mahaney's face, kicked him right in the face in that one. It was a brutal game. It was a physical game. There was a lot of pushing, a lot of shoving, a lot of battling for rebounds, and Gonzaga just got out-muscled. They got outbeat. I don't think Gonzaga, outside of foul trouble, and certainly at the end of the game when they had opportunities to make shots to close the deficit, and they didn't, outside of that, I don't think Gonzaga played that terribly. And it's an interesting, I think some people might find that shocking to say in a game where they scored 30 less points than they average on the season, and that is true, but St. Mary's was able to dictate the pace, which is what they wanted to do. They made big shots when they needed to make big shots. And every time Gonzaga had an opportunity, when they got within 2 and they got within 1, it felt like they would miss a shot. St. Mary's would hit a shot and then go on a little bit of a run. They just played better. This game did not make me feel like St. Mary's is necessarily the better basketball team, but it made me feel like these are very comparable teams. And Gonzaga didn't play their A-plus game. They didn't play their F game or their D game. They played fine. They played okay. They did some good things. They did some bad things. Against most teams, Gonzaga can do some good things and some bad things and win. They just can't against St. Mary's unless St. Mary's is also struggling. And it wasn't a perfect game for St. Mary's either. They had 13 turnovers. They had some struggles of their own. But for the most part, this was just a good game between two good teams, and St. Mary's managed to get a lead and maintain it for the majority of the game. That's really the story of the game. It doesn't feel like it's a lot more complicated than that. Another element of the story was the foul trouble. Foul trouble in the front court. It feels like when we're talking about Gonzaga losses this year, which we haven't done much in the last month or so, it is about foul trouble for either Anton Watson or Graham Ike. In this case, it was Graham Ike. Ike had 2 fouls in the first 4 minutes of this game. He had to sit very early, sat for the majority of the rest of the first half, and then he picked up 2 fouls in the first 5 minutes of the second half, sat for the majority of the second half until the last 5 minutes, came back in. That's it. That's your story right there. Graham Ike had 10 points, 5 rebounds, 5 of 12 shooting. So even when he was on the floor, he wasn't particularly effective. He had a shot blocked a few times, things we haven't seen happen to him all that often this year. But the majority of the issue for Gonzaga was not Graham Ike's performance when he was on the floor. It's the fact that he wasn't on the floor. That was the issue. Because when he wasn't on the floor, Mitchell Saxon dominated. And Braden Huff played better, I think, in this game overall. But the majority of the defensive assignment on Mitchell Saxon came from Ben Gregg. And Ben did pretty well, too. Now, Mitchell finished with 19 and 15. He was also only 6 of 15 from the field, though. To be able to get a 7-foot, strong, physical big man to shoot 6 of 15 from the field is a good, promising sign for Gonzaga's defense, because the guy guarding him for the majority of the game was not Graham Ike. Ben Gregg blocked him once. Braden Huff blocked him once. Those guys played pretty good defense on Mitchell Saxon. But he was still too tough. He was still too strong. The issue for Gonzaga was not the defense on ball on Mitchell Saxon. It was rebounding. They got massively out-rebounded in this one. I think St. Mary's had something like they had 13 offensive rebounds in this game. Gonzaga had 22 total rebounds. St. Mary's had 13 on the offensive glass. Saxon had 6 of them. That was killer for Gonzaga. It was a physical game, and St. Mary's was just more physical. That's what resulted in a win for them. Aidan Mahaney, also a fantastic game for him, 23 points. Best game he's had in a while. He steps up in these situations, even though he wilted in Moraga last week. He stepped up and played well in this one. Had a lot to say about it for a guy who was really bad the last time these two teams played. But hey, that's kind of what happens in these rivalry-type games. Gonzaga had 4 turnovers in the first 4 minutes of this game, and it looked like it was going to become a big problem for them, but I think they deserve a big hat tip for the fact that they only finished this game with 7 turnovers. St. Mary's had 13. Gonzaga had 3 turnovers in the last 37 minutes or 36 minutes of gameplay in this game. Against a St. Mary's team that is very good defensively, that is impressive. Ryan Nembhard had a 13-point, 11-assist double-double. He had a pretty ugly turnover down the stretch, although that was at a point in the game where it was probably out of reach as it was, and he did finish with 4 turnovers. But 11 assists and 4 turnovers against one of the top 20 defensive teams in the country is darn good, and he deserves credit for that as well. Unfortunately for Gonzaga, this loss does put us in, they're in an at-large situation. They were already in a spot where we feel very comfortable about them still making the NCAA tournament. But now we start to wonder, what does this mean? They may not be falling onto the bubble, but where are they going to get seated in the NCAA tournament? Are they switching with St. Mary's? Where are they going to land? We're going to discuss all of that after a word from today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Folks, passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy. And it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and to level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you are looking for. Plus, with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that W. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are still talking Gonzaga versus St. Mary's. The Zags dropping 1-2 in the season against St. Mary's. They lose that WCC Championship game. We're going to talk about what it means for the Zags as we get closer to Selection Sunday, 4 days away. For many of you, as you are listening to this right now, that game is going to be played on, Selection Sunday will be on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. So we got a handful of days. Lots of other results for most of the Power 6 conferences over the next couple of days. So a lot of the data when we're comparing Gonzaga's resumes to other teams, that is all going to change. Gonzaga's resume is set where they are at right now. But many of the other teams, most of the other teams in that 6, 7, 8, 9 seed range, according to Joe Lunardi, according to other bracketologists, they all have more games to go. Some of those teams will boost their resume up into the 5, 6 seed range and potentially push Gonzaga down. Some of those teams will go the opposite direction, will play themselves all the way onto the bubble with early conference season losses. So this is going to change, and we'll have updates. We'll have updates on Friday for any major things that happen that could alter where Gonzaga's where they're going to potentially get seeded in March. But here's where we're at right now. Gonzaga's 25-7. They finished the season 25-7. By the way, they have the longest streak in college basketball history of consecutive 25 win seasons, 17 straight years. The Zags have won 25 or more games. Just an incredible accomplishment. Wanted to get that a shout out there. 25-7 for the Zags, 14-2 in the conference. They finished with a 3-6 record in quad 1 games, 4-1 in quad 2 games, which means they are 7-7 combined. Between quad 1 and quad 2, Gonzaga 7-7. 18-0 in those quad 3 and quad 4 games. That is the snapshot look at Gonzaga's resume based on the net. It is not the sole factor that is used to determine Gonzaga's spot in the NCAA tournament. Not even close. Some of the Selection Sunday committee members probably are valuing it much less. Some of them are valuing it much more, but ultimately it is not the driving factor. However, it is what we're going to use right now as an exercise to compare Gonzaga's resume, because I think some people might have a hard time imagining that Gonzaga is still in the conversation as a 6 or 7 seed after losing this game. As a reminder, coming into this game, Joe Lunardi's latest bracketology, and I'm recording this before, he's updating it daily now. So I'm recording this before his Wednesday update, which will reflect where he believes Gonzaga might get seeded after that loss to St. Mary's. But prior to that, he had Gonzaga as a 6 seed in Omaha, and he had St. Mary's as a 7 seed in Charlotte. It feels like the simple solution here is to just flip them. Have Gonzaga now be a 7 seed in Charlotte, have St. Mary's be a 6 seed in Omaha. It doesn't really matter where they go, just wanted to highlight that here. And for those of you thinking there's no way that Gonzaga's resume stacks up, it's pretty close. It's pretty close. Now, Gonzaga's 3 quad 1 wins, much better than the spot they were in a month ago when they had just picked up their first quad 1 win on February 10th against Kentucky. But now that they have 3 quad 1 wins, it's still not great, but it's not as bad as I think maybe that perception might be. Here are the teams in the 6-7 seed range, according to Joe Lunardi's March 12th bracketology report. Washington State, Clemson, Wisconsin are the other 6 seeds outside of Gonzaga. The other 7 seeds are Utah State, Texas Tech, and Florida. Wazoo is 9-7 in quad 1 and quad 2 games combined. Again, Gonzaga is 7-7. But Wazoo also has a quad 3 loss. Clemson is 10-8 in those quad 1 and quad 2 games. Now, Clemson has 3 quad 2 losses. Washington State has 4 quad 2 losses. Gonzaga has just 1. Clemson also has 2 quad 3 losses. So yes, their quad 1 record of 5-5 is much better than Gonzaga's. Same with Wazoo 6-3, but both those resumes have pretty significant warts on them as well. Then you get to Wisconsin, who is 11-11 in quad 1 and quad 2 games. Again, Gonzaga's 7-7. Wisconsin's 11-11. But Wisconsin 4-8 in quad 1 games and 7-4 in quad 2 games. Wisconsin has 4 quad 2 losses. That's wild. Utah State, a 7 seed, 5-4 in those quad 1 games, and equal 4-1 in those quad 2 games, as similar to Gonzaga. So they're 9-5 overall. Texas Tech, 5-8 in quad 1 games. Also, like Gonzaga, they're 4-1 in those quad 2 games. That makes them 10-9. And then Florida is only 4-7 in quad 1 games, only 3-2 in quad 2 games, to make them 7-9 overall. And they also have a quad 3 loss as well. So Gonzaga's 500 record in quad 1 and quad 2 games ties them with Wisconsin, ahead of Florida, slightly behind Texas Tech, slightly behind Clemson and Washington State, a little further behind Utah State, but they don't have as many games as the rest of the teams on here, with Gonzaga being in that conversation as well. However, Gonzaga is higher in the net and at KenPom than every single one of these teams, every single one of them. They are more highly valued by KenPom, by the net, than every single team that is considered a 6 seed or a 7 seed right now. And KenPom has adjusted after the Gonzaga-St. Mary's game. Gonzaga is still ahead of St. Mary's in the KenPom rankings, even after this loss. Again, not every voter cares that much about KenPom. Not every voter even cares, or committee member cares that much about the net, although they are being asked to utilize that as a tool. But I think it is important to acknowledge that while Gonzaga's number of quad 1 wins is the lowest amount of all of these teams, admittedly not by a lot for some of these teams, only 1 less than Wisconsin and Florida, only 2 less than Clemson. They're really close in that conversation, but they are more valued by the net, which is what they're using. They're considered a higher ranked team than all of them. It's just, it doesn't mean that they deserve to be a higher seed than all these teams. I'm not arguing that at all. Most of these teams probably deserve to be at or higher on the seed line than Gonzaga. And I don't want to make it seem like that's the argument that I'm making. Oh, Gonzaga is better than all these teams. They should still get a 5 seed. No, that's not the argument we're making here. Had Gonzaga beat St. Mary's, that might be the argument that we'd be making here, and we'd be having a little bit more fun having that conversation. But the argument here is that Gonzaga's resume is right along with these. When you consider that, yes, the quad 1 record's a little bit worse, the quad 2 record's comparable, the quad 3, quad 4 record is better, the net ranking is better, the KenPom ranking is better. When you kind of compile all of that together, Gonzaga's right in the mix. That's my argument. They're in the mix. And you throw the 8 seeds on here, which I didn't throw each individual team on here, but I did a quick scope of them, the 8 seeds according to Lenardi. Gonzaga's better than them. Pretty convincingly, in most cases, has a better body of work and a better resume than the 8 seeds. That doesn't mean the committee won't give Gonzaga an 8 seed, but I'm arguing that they shouldn't. That Gonzaga should be a 7 seed. St. Mary's should be a 6 seed. That is what I think is going to happen. But again, all of these teams that we've mentioned have more games to go. If Wisconsin rattles off a bunch of games and wins the Big Ten tournament, upsets Purdue, they're not going to be a 6 seed. Likewise, if Clemson loses early in the ACC tournament, if Wazoo loses early in the Pac-12 tournament to somebody like, I don't know, Oregon State or whomever, that changes the conversation too. Most of these teams, I think all of these teams, in fact, are not done playing basketball this season. Their resumes have more games to be played, to be evaluated when compared to Gonzaga's resume, which, like I said, is already done. So that will change, and we will talk about it more on Friday. But for me, for my money right now, Gonzaga deserves to be a 6 or a 7 seed. I think they will get a 7 seed. If they do, I'm not going to probably make a huge grandstand that they deserve to be a 6 seed. I think a 7 seed feels reasonable, considering the overall body of work, considering the early season struggles, considering the late season success, considering dropping the last game to St. Mary's. A 7 seed feels fine. Feels fine. They'll get a good-ish Power 6 team as a 10 seed, probably. Maybe they'll throw them a Mountain West team, which I kind of would hate, but I could see that being possible, that they play like New Mexico or something in the first round. And then they'll get a 2 seed. And we'll talk On a future episode, Thursday or Friday's episode, we'll talk about who the 2 seeds are, what that might look like, who are some good and bad matchups for Gonzaga to potentially end up running into as we get closer to Selection Sunday in the NCAA Tournament. But for right now, for anybody panicking, Gonzaga is going to make the field of 68. They are not going to be a play-in team. They are going to get a single-digit seed. It is possible it is an 8 or a 9 seed, and that sucks because it's really hard to make a Sweet 16 as an 8 or a 9 seed. But it's also possible it's a 7 seed. It's possible it's a 6 seed. And at that point, Gonzaga could do it. You got to upset a 3 seed or a 2 seed, but the Zags are capable of doing that. I'll tell you right now, even after this loss, nobody wants to play them. If you're Marquette, potentially going into that without Tyler Kolek, if you're Creighton, if you're anybody in that conversation, Creighton would be very fun with the Ryan Nembhard of it all. If you're one of those teams in that conversation, Arizona, obviously for a lot of other factors as well, Iowa State, they struggle all away from their home, Auburn. If you're those teams, you do not want to face Gonzaga as a 7 or 6 seed. They don't want to face them. I promise you that. I think Gonzaga is still in a good spot. It's frustrating that they lost this game, of course, but they're not in any danger of falling out of the field. They're in slight danger of falling onto that 8-9 line, but my money's saying they're a 6 or a 7 seed. Well, the Zag women were stunned for a second year in a row by the Portland Pilots in the WCC Championship game. It likely ended the hopes of the Lady Zags hosting in Spokane this year. We're going to talk more about that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Get buckets, folks, with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 in your pocket if your bet wins. So you can bet on all your favorite Zags and the NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Right now, USC is a 3.5-point favorite over Washington in the Pac-12 tournament. Look, Gonzaga saw both these teams. Give me UW. Neither program's in great shape right now. UW doesn't have a head coach, but I think giving USC 3.5 points is a mistake. And if you are in agreement, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, folks, final segment here. Locked on Zags, continuing to talk about the 2 losses for the Gonzaga basketball programs in Las Vegas on Tuesday at the Orleans Arena. The women's basketball team stunned by the Portland Pilots in that WCC Championship, 67-66. The Pilots are dancing for the second consecutive year after beating the Gonzaga Bulldogs. First loss for the Zags since November 26th. When they played Louisville. That is the last time Lisa Fortier's team has lost a basketball game. A week ago, Gonzaga beat Portland in Spokane by 50. 90-40 was the final score in that one. When Gonzaga went to the Child Center to play the Pilots on their home floor, they beat them by 21. So this was a startling result. And that's not to take anything away from Portland. They played well. They earned the victory in this one. Gonzaga did not play well, 5 of 20 from 3 as a team. They lost despite getting, and I could not believe when I read this on the box score, 25 offensive rebounds. 25, again, that's more rebounds than the men's team had entirely in their game against St. Mary's. Gonzaga had 25 offensive boards. They just could not hit the broadside of a barn. 70 field goal attempts. They made 26 of them. That's 37.1%. Yvonne Ejim had 17 points and 11 rebounds, but she went 8 of 20 from the field. She had 7 offensive rebounds, but was just struggling to put the ball in the hole. Eliza Hollingsworth had a great WCC tournament. She led the team with 20 points. In their first game against Pacific, she had a 13-point, 11-rebound double-double here in this one for the Zags. But the story here is that this kills the opportunity for Gonzaga, most likely, I should say, to host as the number 4 seed in Spokane in the NCAA tournament. All signs were trending towards that being the situation. And it took a long time for it to finally materialize where it looked like Gonzaga was going to get that 4 seed. Even though they hadn't lost since November 26th, the committee was hesitant to put them on the top 4 seed line because of their conference strength of schedule. I was going to add more things to that list, but that's really it. That's kind of the only argument that the committee had. They were blowing the doors off everybody that they were playing. They played successfully in the non-conference. They beat Stanford. Their 2 losses were to a good Wazoo team and a very good Louisville team. There was really no compelling argument. And then finally, towards the end of the regular season, they finally decided, hey, we're going to consider Gonzaga one of the 4 seeds. That would get them, if you're a top 4 seed, you get to choose where you're hosting. They would host it in Spokane, would get an incredible opportunity to play in front of their home crowd. And now they lose this game. Portland steals a bid. That's another conversation for bubble teams on the women's basketball side. But for Gonzaga, it likely means almost certainly means they won't get that 4 seed. And that's unfortunate. And you can make an argument that their resume still deserves to be in that conversation. And I think there's absolutely an argument for it. But I'd be very surprised if not winning the WCC tournament still allowed Gonzaga to get a 4 seed. Again, you can argue whether you agree with that or not, but I just don't think it's going to happen. The margin of error was always known to be razor thin. We've been talking about it all season long. The Zags just didn't have any wiggle room. And that's what made their run so incredible. They weren't just beating teams, they were destroying them, blowing them out. They were doing everything they could to make it so that margin didn't have to be so thin. And yet they still stumbled in this game, still lost, still now in a position where they're probably not going to get that top 4 seed. Portland 108th in the net. So it's not a great loss for Gonzaga. It's also not horrible. Portland's not like horrendous by any stretch. They made the tournament last year, but it's still not a good loss for Gonzaga. I still think Gonzaga is going to end up as a 5 seed, but the committee used Gonzaga not winning the WCC tournament last year as a pretty good excuse to drop them significantly, threw them on the 9 line against Ole Miss, who was an 8 seed. Ole Miss won that game, then went ahead and beat Stanford in the second round. If they dropped Gonzaga to an 8-9, I think there'd be a riot in Spokane. That would be way too low to drop this Gonzaga team. I think they should only drop to a 5 seed. I worry the committee will drop them further. Looking at the bracket, looking at where teams are right now, the plausible landing spots for the Gonzaga women's team in my mind, a 5 seed in Boulder, Colorado, where Colorado would be the 4 seed. That feels doable. Also, some fun intrigue there. Taylor Carr, star point guard at Gonzaga about a decade ago, is an assistant coach at Colorado. Would be fun to face the Buffs in the second round in a 4-5 matchup right there. I could see Gonzaga getting a 6 seed in Corvallis, and I don't love it. In fact, I kind of hate it. They play a 3-seeded Oregon State team in the second round, assuming both teams advanced, of course. I could see the committee doing that, though. Corvallis, in their mind, is close. It sets up a WCC matchup next year with Oregon State moving to the West Coast Conference. I could see the committee looking at that, seeing the intrigue, seeing the TV eyeballs that might get, and throwing that together. It's unfortunate for Gonzaga. I don't think Oregon State and Gonzaga are 3 seed lines apart from a talent perspective, but that makes a fun 6-3 potential second-round matchup. It's just unfortunate that Gonzaga would go into that game not only as the heavy underdog, but also playing a effectively entirely road game in Corvallis. But I could see that being possible. I really don't think they would put them on the 7-seed line in Los Angeles, but there's this nagging feeling of what they did to this team last year. If this Gonzaga team is a 7 seed, again, that's a criminal underseeding of what they have accomplished this year. It would be a tragedy for them to be a 7 seed, or obviously anything worse than that. A 6 seed in Corvallis, not great, but I at least understand the committee's argument for doing it if they were to. 5 seed in Boulder, that feels right to me. That feels good. It's a 5 seed, but you're not getting the benefit of playing in Spokane. You have to travel on the road. You got to play a 4-seeded Colorado team at their home. That's tough, but that's fair, I think, based on them not winning this game against Portland, even though they're still only a 3-loss team, still had a remarkable season the way that they did. And I think they're absolutely capable of upsetting Colorado. I think they're capable of upsetting Oregon State in Corvallis. They're just harder potential matchups. This loss also probably hurts the odds of Lisa Fortier winning the Coach of the Year award, which we've been talking about a handful of times on this show. But having said that, if they get a 5 seed in Boulder and they win their first round game, they upset Colorado, they upset the 1 seed who's on that side of the bracket. I could see Lisa staying in that conversation as a potential Coach of the Year candidate. Still only a 3-loss team, still a tremendous season, but tough to see it end the way that it did. Tough to see it be part of an 0-2 day for the Gonzaga basketball programs in Las Vegas. You just don't see that very often. Both these teams had tremendous seasons. The women's team obviously more dominant, more consistent. The men's team came on at the right time and then floundered in this game, but sad to see it end this way in the WCC tournament, but we got 5 or 6 more days to wait. We're going to see where these teams end up, and we're going to hopefully be able to flush these games out of the system and go into the NCAA tournament on both sides with a little bit more momentum, with a little chip on their shoulder, with a little anger, and potentially allow that to lead them to some extra victories as we get into the big dance. It's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Appreciate every single one of you. We will be back on Thursday talking more about the NCAA tournament, more about the results around the conference, what it means for Gonzaga and their seed line. We got some other updates and fun stuff to talk about as well, all coming up later this week. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, as always, despite a rough day, go Zags.